The Trump administration has shocked everyone once again. This time, it has effectively surrendered in the chip war with China. Remember how Trump promised that tariffs would break China's economy, that he would bring Beijing to its knees through tough pressure? But in the end, those were just loud words. The reality turned out to be that American technology cannot survive without China. From rare metals to manufacturing, the United States depends on the very country it tried to fight. Now Trump seems to have finally realized what experts have been saying for years. China controls the rare earth metals essential for producing AI chips and fighter jets. And after months of bold statements and bans, the United States has begun quietly retreating. But this is not just about tariffs and semiconductors. It's a story of how the United States started a tech war it can no longer control. At the center of this drama is NVIDIA, the symbol of the American chip industry. Its H100 and H20 chips are the backbone of everything related to artificial intelligence. And here's the irony. When the United States blocked exports to China, it wasn't just Beijing that suffered. NVIDIA itself took a major hit. Without the Chinese market, its revenue takes a sharp dive. The US tried to weaken China, but ended up hurting itself. In this video, we'll find out how far China has gone, and why the US is now practically begging it for resources and investment. We'll also talk about a secret plan pushed by Trump's AI advisor, David Sachs. In a recent interview, he revealed a strategy that sounds more like a desperate attempt to salvage the situation than a calculated move. So let's unpack what's really going on. On the surface, the US-China standoff looks like a clash of giants. But behind all the rhetoric lies a simple truth. The United States depends on China for technology, and it all begins not with chips, but with raw materials. Rare earth metals aren't widely known, but they are the foundation of all modern electronics. Gallium, germanium, neodymium. Without them, you can't build a single smartphone, electric vehicle, or radar system. China doesn't just produce these elements, it controls around 90% of the world's refining capacity. The United States has failed to establish large-scale domestic production. Currently, it supplies itself with less than 10% and is almost entirely dependent on Chinese imports. When Trump imposed strict restrictions on chip sales to China, including a ban on NVIDIA's H20, Beijing responded swiftly. With no loud threats, it simply cut off exports of rare earth metals to the United States and its allies. And this triggered a real crisis. Within just a couple of weeks, gallium prices rose by more than 20%, germanium by 15%. Key industries ground to a halt: defense, electric vehicles, and green energy. Companies couldn't get the materials they needed. By the end of the second quarter, damage to the US economy was estimated at up to $3.5 billion. The chip ban that was supposed to hurt China ended up hitting the United States instead. Authorities realized how vulnerable their position was and began doing something unusual for them: backing down. By June 2025, Trump's representatives held closed-door talks with China in London. The resulting deal was telling. The United States promised to lift some restrictions in exchange for the return of Chinese supplies. It wasn't just about lifting sanctions. The US also wanted to resume sales of NVIDIA, AMD, and other American chips to China. In mid-July 2025, US authorities allowed NVIDIA to reapply for export licenses to ship H20 chips to China. It was a sharp reversal from the spring ban, which had aimed to keep advanced AI chips out of the hands of the Chinese military. AMD immediately followed suit, applying to export its MI308 chips. This decision didn't come out of nowhere. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stated clearly, "The export approvals are directly tied to the need for the US to secure stable rare earth supplies from China." In response, Beijing softened its restrictions, and that's how this delicate deal emerged: chips in exchange for resources. Now, exports have become not just an economic issue, but part of a larger diplomatic game. The markets responded immediately. NVIDIA shares rose by approximately 4 to 5%, while AMD surged nearly 9%. Analysts began talking about the return of billions in revenue that had been frozen due to the spring sanctions. Investors breathed a sigh of relief. NVIDIA, which had already reached a $4 trillion market cap by the summer, began to grow again, especially after TSMC reported record profits amid surging global demand for AI chips. But it would be wrong to think the United States was happy to resume chip sales to China. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick tried to frame it as a patriotic decision, claiming the approval was only for the fourth most powerful chip, but this was clearly an attempt to save face. It became obvious to everyone. The US backed down because it had no other choice. Yes, the H20 is not NVIDIA's newest chip, but it is still powerful, with high bandwidth and CUDA support. It is fully capable of handling AI models and industrial applications. Unsurprisingly, Chinese companies like ByteDance and Tencent immediately applied to buy it. The chip is still considered excellent, but many have doubts. Even this scaled-down version of an AI chip could strengthen China. Some American politicians fear it will help Beijing advance its military technologies. Analysts believe the US has instead given China a breathing space and a chance to accelerate its own domestic production to eliminate dependence on American components in the future. For NVIDIA and AMD, enormous sums of money are at stake. Due to the bans, they lost billions. NVIDIA alone estimated its losses at $5.5 billion, and AMD up to $800 million. Re-entering the Chinese market is a chance to regain their positions, especially as China is rapidly expanding its AI development, building new factories, data centers, and cloud infrastructure. In short, this is a massive compromise. On one side, there's national security. On the other, profits, control over technology versus the desire to stay in the game, quick revenue versus long-term competition. The US appears to have returned to the Chinese market, but the consequences, such as the rise of Chinese AI development, strengthening of local production, and the transformation of export licenses into tools of political leverage, will unfold later. What happens next is still unclear. China may invest even more aggressively in AI, while the US may tighten its rules. We'll see who outpaces whom. But here's the most interesting part. While the US was trying to correct its mistakes, Chinese companies had already adapted. In fact, they didn't just endure, they used the situation to their advantage. Even before the deal was approved, media reports stated that NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang was deeply dissatisfied with the Trump administration's actions. In a meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, he reportedly said bluntly, "The export restrictions are a strategic mistake. They didn't stop China. They created problems for American business." Meanwhile, Chinese competitors only grew stronger. And he was right. Chinese companies began preparing early. For example, ByteDance, even before the ban, had already purchased over 25,000 H20 chips, worth nearly $16 billion. It wasn't panic. It was a premeditated move. As a result, Chinese firms continued operations smoothly, while American ones faced disruptions. While Washington was trying to roll back its sanctions, Beijing accelerated the development of its domestic industry. SMIC, Huawei, and other state-supported companies invested in research and expanded production. Huawei in particular is showing phenomenal growth. The company proved it could progress without American support. The conclusion is clear. The US attempt to stop Chinese technology only sped up China's path to independence. Take Huawei, for example. When the US blacklisted it in 2019, many believed the company was finished. But by 2023, Huawei released the Mate 60 Pro with 5G support and a 7nm chip made by Chinese foundry SMIC. And in 2024, they unveiled the Kirin 9000C, already without any involvement of American technologies. But that's not all. In just 1 year, Chinese memory manufacturers went from 0 to 5% of the global market. By 2026, that share is expected to reach 10%. Companies like Cambricon and ByteDance are already producing their own graphics chips that are nearly catching up to the H20. And Huawei's Ascend 910C chip even surpasses the H20 in computing power by a factor of 2.6, though it still lags in memory capacity. In 2024, the Chinese government invested over $47 billion into semiconductor development. What was supposed to stop China only gave it momentum. Now imagine how this looks to America's allies. Take ASML, the Dutch company that leads the world in chip-making equipment. Since 2019, it has been banned from selling its most advanced lithography machines to China. That costs the company about $1 billion in lost revenue annually. At the beginning of 2025, ASML again missed its sales targets due to the ongoing restrictions. company leadership is increasingly vocal in its dissatisfaction, warning that if this continues, China will start producing its own equipment, and once that happens, the lost market will be gone for good. The US hopes it can outmaneuver Huawei by flooding the market with simplified H20 chips, specifically designed to comply with export rules. But this strategy feels more like overconfidence than a real plan. After all, last time it ended in failure. Huawei not only survived, it grew stronger. Trump's AI advisor, David Sachs, called this a subtle move. According to him, the downgraded chips would prevent Huawei from monopolizing the Chinese market and hinder its expansion abroad. Supposedly, the US could keep the market under control. But all of this sounds like a gamble. The US hopes these chips will slow Huawei down, but in reality, the opposite tends to happen. The stakes are enormous. If Huawei continues gaining momentum, it could become a leader not just in China, but globally, especially in countries that are increasingly distancing themselves from the United States. This is no longer just about money, it's a battle for global influence. If the United States does not urgently change its course, it risks losing not only this war, but its technological future. The fight for global tech leadership has already begun, and right now, America is the one trying to catch up. So hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest developments in the world. See you in the next video.